like we've got some folks that are coming in still.
Seems to have slowed down a little bit, so I think we can probably get started with the meeting. Do we have an agenda slide? I think we do. Welcome, everyone. I am Kimberly Petz. I am one of the assistant directors in employer services, and I have my co-facilitator here, Diane Stanton, and we will be taking you through today's employer advisory committee meeting. Diane, do you want to go over the agenda?
Sure. Thanks, Kim. Good to see you. Good to see everyone. Appreciate everyone's time and attention today. We've got a legislative update. Obviously, the legislature started back in session at the beginning of January. They're finishing up some bills from last year, and they'll be introducing some new bills through the middle of February. So we've got Joycelyn with that. The governor issued an executive order, which I'm sure everyone is aware of, and may have some pretty detailed questions about, but we'll bring in Beth from Service Retirement to really help walk us and talk us through some of what we at CalSTRS are doing to address the governor's executive order related to bringing retirees back from retirement. Karen Doran, who's our Director of Communications, she's going to be previewing some of the efforts behind the scenes related to the CalSTRS.com website and some of the changes in look and feel that are expected in mid-March. So she'll kind of give everyone a preview of that, so it's not a surprise between now and the next EAC meeting, because the .com will look a little different. And then we've got a training related to the defined benefit membership. And so we'll have Jennifer present that training. With that, this is, and I'm choking, I apologize. With that,
I can jump in with our, you go choke and then, or don't, as the case may be, please. So most of you guys that are here have been here before. And if you're new to our format here for our virtual EAC, you are in a webinar format. So you will not be able to unmute or turn on your camera. If you have questions, we will actually have you raise your hand using the raise hand feature on the bottom of your screen. And at that point, our folks in the background here we will ask you to unmute yourself, and they will allow that functionality available to you. You can ask questions that way. You can ask questions in the Q&A box that's at the bottom, and we will answer as we are able to. We have some other folks in the background also answering questions. And so some of those might get answered privately, they might get answered publicly, or they might be answered live by whoever's speaking at the time. And you can still also utilize our advisory committee email address, advisory committee at CalSTRS.com, I believe it is. And I think that might be on the next slide, or there we go, advisory committee at CalSTRS.com. And again, if you haven't gotten the materials for today's meeting, they are at the link on the prior slide on the advisory committee page on the CalSTRS.com website. As Diane mentioned, going through the agenda, we have a very full agenda and with a lot of information to get thrown at you. It's possible that you might have questions that we can't necessarily get you the answers to today, but we will take them down and we will follow up with you. So if you want to follow up with us after the fact using that advisory committee email address, please feel free to. So without further ado, I think it is Joycelyn who is our first up.
Good afternoon, everyone. Joycelyn Martinez-Wade, Director of Governmental Relations, and I have a fairly brief update for you today. As Diane mentioned, the legislature came back into session on January 3rd. They have until February 18th to introduce bills, and of course, as you might expect, they wait till the 17th, 18th to really get going. So we'll see hundreds of bills introduced those 2 days, but so far, it's been fairly light in things that are affecting CalSTRS, but there are two important bills I want to tell you about. So there's SB 868 by Senator Cortese, who's chair of the Public Employment and Retirement Committee on the Senate side. And so his bill is dealing with the SBMA, the Supplemental Benefit Maintenance Account benefits. And 2 years ago, and we do this every 2 years, we had a report on the SBMA because it has additional funds that are available. And we have to put out options for what some of that money could be spent on. And it all has to do with providing those SBMA benefits, which are related to purchasing power and people's purchasing power being reduced after their retirement. And so what stakeholders have done, and it's CalRTA and CTA that are the main sponsors of that bill right now, is that they have taken what we call option one. It just was the first option listed in the report. And one of the ones required by laws that has to deal with folks who retired prior to 1999 when some benefit enhancements came into effect after that point. But the bill outlines option one, which would increase the supplemental benefit maintenance account benefit, to be a little redundant, but the benefit people will receive from that account, it's going to increase it based on when they retired. So what decade? So from the 90s, from 90 to up through 98, because remember it's pre-99 retirees. Then there's a different percentage for folks who retired in the 80s and a different percentage for folks who retired prior to 1980. And so it'll be an increase in the benefit. It will have its own purchasing power protection and improvement factor. So that is one kind of idea that's been in the works for quite some time. So the member groups are pushing forward on that this year. And I will keep you posted as that makes its way through the legislative process. The second bill that's been introduced related to CalSTRS is AB 1667 by Assemblymember Cooper, who's chair of the Assembly Public Employment and Retirement Committee. Right now, the bill has intent language in it. It's related to some concept beliefs that we received from both member and employer stakeholder groups last year. And so it's related to overpayment liability, appeals rights for systemic population when there's an employer audit, guidance given to employers on credible compensation and related topics. And so right now, again, it's intent language. We're anticipating more specific language being dropped in, and the main sponsors of that are CalRTA, CTA, and CSESA, which is the county superintendents. And so we'll be working with them. It's timing wise, just so you know, on that SB 868 I mentioned first, we're planning to take that to our board in March for a position. And AB 1667, the second bill, will depend on when we see the more specific language and amendments that are planned for that. So maybe in May, or as you'll recall, our chair and vice chair do have delegated authority to take positions if they need to, based on timing. And just a reminder, our one sponsored bill this year is our housekeeping bill. And so I've gone through those provisions with you previously. The Assembly Committee will be the author this year. And I will share with you in May what the bill number is, because that hasn't yet been introduced. But I will stop there and see if there's any questions. Not seeing any, so that's all I have for you today, but I'll be back in May probably with a lot more information. So thank you for your time.
Thanks, Joycelyn. Appreciate it. And you may also want to be on standby in case we have questions coming in related to the governor's executive order. I know there's been several different business units that have helped out with that. So again, we'll take those questions and we'll dole them out as subject matter experts are available today. I'm not seeing any other questions, Kim. Are you? I'm not seeing.
No, I don't see any. I don't see any raised hands either.
Right, perfect. Let's move to the next agenda item. Speaking of the governor's executive order, I've just forgot the agenda for a minute there. I think I was too busy trying not to choke earlier. We've got Beth from Service Retirement who's here to help walk everyone through the governor's executive order. Again, there are two executive orders related to CalSTRS retirees returning back to classrooms. The first came out in August. It was a modest suspension of a requirement that the school districts publicly approve the returning of the retiree to school districts. The second executive order that came out in mid-January is a lot more detailed and a lot more specific and provides a lot more relief and flexibility for the retirees to come back and for school districts and what they need to do to help facilitate that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Beth.
Thank you, Diane.
You're welcome.
Yeah, mentioned, my name is Beth Ruggiero, and we're going to talk about the most recent executive order, N322, and as it relates to how we're administering it. I want to thank each and every one of you guys as you hang in there with us through all these changes. I appreciate all your great questions. I know some will come up through this presentation. I know Kim will be on the lookout for me so we can answer those as we go through. So let's start this party here. So to start the discussion, we have to start with provision 1, which is what needs to be followed in order for the rest of the order to be allowed. I provided the specific verbiage on each of these provisions within the slides, but following each one, we'll have a breakdown of how CalSTRS is implementing these provisions. So let's move to that next slide here. So provision 1 identifies the audience this order applies to, which is our K through 12 school districts, county offices of education, and charter schools. The order does not apply to community college districts. And I know that this is a change from what we originally provided in our employer directive. This has since been corrected. The one that's currently on the .com website does have the most current information. But again, thank you for your flexibility and all the questions that we received as we were getting the additional clarification from the governor's office on the true intent of this order. So this provision speaks to the written finding that the superintendent, county superintendent of schools, or the charter school leader would need to create, advising that they require the temporary staffing flexibilities afforded by this order. And while the finding, it's not required to be submitted to CalSTRS, I highly encourage you guys to maintain it at both county office and district levels just to cover basis. But CalSTRS will be applying these provisions to all earnings for the period of July 1st of 21 through March 31st, 22 for those that have returned to the work at the K through 12 districts, COE, or charter schools. But if you know that your entity is not creating this finding, then you will need to continue the process identified under Executive Order N1221, in which the exemption for the separation from service requirement form, that SR 1897 form, would need to be submitted to CalSTRS prior to the retiree starting work. All the normal requirements would apply to that request. If no form is received, CalSTRS will operate under the understanding that you have the documented written finding as required in provision 1. Okay, let's move to the next slide. So provision 5, this one speaks specifically to our annual post-retirement limit suspension. And so let's get into the next slide, which will go through some of the specifics. Let's see, can you place the SR form number in here for us? Yes, I will. Yes, SR 1897 is the actual form. Thank you, Diane, for answering that for me. So in regards to provision 5, any retired defined benefit member, regardless of age, is exempt from the annual earnings limit between the period of July 1st, 2021 through March 31st, 22, as long as the work is reported from, again, that K through 12 school district, county office of education, or charter school. Sorry, I know I'm going to be on repeat a lot here, so my apologies for the redundancy. Any earnings reported for the period of July 1st, 21 through March 31st of 22 will not be taken in consideration for the evaluation. Only the earnings for the period of April 1st through June 30th are going to be evaluated. So let's jump to the next slide and we can get into one of our examples. So in this situation, a retiree returned back to the district and earned $80,000 from a K through 12 for the period of July 1st through March 31st. So for that period, we are not going to consider any of the $80,000. Then from April 1st, June 30th through June 30th, they earn an additional $50,000. And it's only going to be that $50,000 that we're taking into our consideration for the earnings limit review. So in this case, the retiree would be over our current earnings limit of $48,428 by $1,572. That would be the amount that we would be able to collect back from the retiree had they earned that amount during that fiscal year from CalSTRS. All right, let's move into provision 6. So provision 6 specifically speaks to our separation from service requirement. That's the first 180 days after the member first retires. Normal age requirement, I know that that's one of the requirements still in there. I've gotten a lot of questions on that. That's a federally, that's something that we have to maintain in order to maintain tax status. So we have to comply with that. But let's get into the next slide so we can kind of break down this provision 6. So due to this provision, any retiree who meets that normal retirement age, which is age 60 for our 2% at 60 members and age 62 for our 2% at 62 members, and also returns back, here's my redundancy, K through 12 school district, county office of ed, or charter school, the following requirements are all suspended. So all 4 of those bullets are suspended. They don't need to go back to a critically needed position, except most of them, I believe, probably are. The termination of employment with the employer cannot be the reason the retiree is returning. In other words, they can return back to that same position they retired from. They cannot have received financial inducement. That one goes away now. And they cannot begin performing the work prior to CalSTRS getting the required documents. So there's no need to submit the form for those that are returning to work during this order and meet that normal retirement age. Let's go to the next slide. So in an effort to support you and our membership, we will not require that SR 1897 form for anyone who has met normal retirement age and is returning back to work in that K through 12 COE or charter school from July 1st, 2021 through March 31st, 22 period. CalSTRS will be conducting a manual review and will be applying the exemption to each of the retirees' accounts for their 180-day period. We do ask that you maintain accurate records and stop anyone who has returned to work with financial inducement or return back to that same job. Those folks should not be continuing to work after March 31st, 2022. So we do ask that you take that into consideration with your review of who to continue working at your school district after that point. Again, if the need to acquire the services of the retiree is not due to the needs identified within the executive order, the employer should continue to utilize the exemption processed within the previous order, that N1221. Form would still be required prior to the member returning to work, but still the board resolution would not be required to be sent to CalSTRS. All right, let's go to the next slide. Thank you. So since the executive order does not apply to those who do not meet normal retirement age or for our community college group, we will be having our automated letters. Those are still going to be going out to our retirees. These letters are generated so once we receive that very first post-retirement dollar in the door, one letter is generated. The other one is generated once the member hits the mid to the limit. So those letters are going to continue because this executive order does not apply to everybody. I understand that this can cause a lot of confusion on their end, on your end, because they're asking you guys a bunch of questions. So just for your own edification on our process, if CalSTRS were to collect on a post-retirement receivable for any retiree, we do send them a manual letter, and it provides the actual amount that the retiree went over, how much they're in violation of, the period of the violation, and how much we're going to reduce their benefit by, the date it's going to be reduced. So there's a lot of very specific information within those letters. So again, if any retiree comes back to you and they're worried about a letter that they receive from CalSTRS, if it looks pretty generic, then there's a good chance that it's just one of those automatic letters that go out just so that they're aware of the restrictions of returning to work. So my apologies for the confusion that will probably continue for a little bit as this goes forward. So starting on or after April 1st, if anybody is taking on a new assignment at your district, that's when we're going to be resuming our previous process identified by that executive order N1221. So the forms will need to be received prior to that retiree returning to work. So if you know that somebody is going to be starting work after April 1st, go ahead and start submitting those exemption forms to us now, and we'll go ahead and start processing those. Administrating this order is extremely manual on our end. So I cannot stress the importance of supplying us with reporting as timely as possible. We're going to be applying these exemptions to the separation from service for these folks. And again, if we get payroll maybe in 3 years for this period, it's going to be very hard to go back and to administer it the same way that we're administering it now. It's not to say that we can't, it's just going to be a lot more hand holding between the two of us to be able to get that done. So I just plead with you, please get these post-retirement payroll lines into us as timely as possible. So let's see. Yeah, let's go to the next slide. One thing to go back for. While the executive order suspends 2 of the sections of our education code, it does not relinquish any other requirement from any other code. Specifically, the requirements within Education Code 22714, which governs our CalSTRS retirement incentive program, those remain in place. So that section identifies that if a retiree that was awarded the 2 years of service credit through this program, they cannot return back to that same district in any capacity for 5 years from the date they were awarded that incentive. So while a retiree that received this incentive may return back to another employer and be okay under this executive order during the 180 days, I would just please be aware, if you have offered the CalSTRS retirement incentive program, just please be sure you're not bringing back anybody that has received that within the past 5 years, because we will still be required to revoke those 2 years as of the date they return back to work. Again, it's not to exclude them from working at any other district, but those are the requirements set in law for the CalSTRS retirement incentive program. Let's see. I see a question from Patty Martinez. What if the member is continuing in the position they started in? Do we need to submit for those retirees? So great question, Patty. So as of March 31st, these folks should not be continuing to work in that capacity. So our idea is that you should be letting that retiree know, thank you for your service. Thank you for your assistance in this critical time. As of March 31st, you are no longer able to continue in this fashion. If they decide to take on another position, it is a different assignment. They were previously a chemistry teacher and now they're coming back to sub in a different capacity, then yes, you could still submit that SR 1897 form if that's a position that they're going to be going back to after April 1st, and we will go ahead and process that. That's not a problem at all. Great question. I think that is the end of my slides.
We do have a raised hand.
Oh, okay.
If we could get Vina unmuted so that she can ask her question.
Hi, I just wanted to clarify the example you just used about the teacher changing the position. Okay. What if they, after March 31st, they continue that position, the same position, not a different classification? Can they submit a 1897 form from April if they continue in position after March 31st?
So I can't hear you fully, but so what I'm gathering is this person is going to maintain the same position, and it's not due to requirements, so they're not meeting any of those other issues where they return back to the same position or anything like that. Is that correct, Vina?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yes, we're going to go ahead and provide. So if we have earnings from July 1st through March 31st for retirees that have returned back through the K through 12 COE or charter school, we're going to be applying that separation from service exemption for the entire period. We know that there's going to be a lot of folks that fall within that basket, that they are completing, they're coming back to sub, it's in a different assignment. They didn't receive financial inducement. Again, really hearing the call to the executive order to assist with the districts. And since they're already in that position, we wouldn't expect another form to be submitted to us. So we're going to go ahead and place the exemption for their full 180 days.
Oh, thank you.
I hope that answered it. But if you guys have any other questions, I know different things come up to you guys throughout the day. You know where I live. I live on the other end of the post-retirement at calstrs.com mailbox. So if you guys have any questions associated to this, please don't hesitate to ask. We love to provide clarification or any help and support for you guys. You guys do a lot of work for us, so we really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Beth. That was fantastic. I don't see any other Q&As. I don't see any other raised hands. Again, so if you have any more questions for Beth on this particular issue, please reach out to her directly, or you can use that advisory committee email address and we'll make sure it gets forwarded to her.
Kim, I'd just like to jump in and just remind folks, if district staff are getting questions from retirees that have questions or concerns, I would strongly advise and recommend that retirees be directed to CalSTRS.com so that the uniqueness that is their retirement can be reviewed and contemplated as part of the retirees making the decision to return back to the classroom. Again, a lot of times at CalSTRS, we often say, well, it depends. And I know that's incredibly frustrating, but we want to, again, we really want to make sure that the retirees who are returning back to the classroom aren't negatively impacted as a result of that decision and choice. We want to minimize any inconvenience or extra paperwork or redoing of paperwork as it relates to administering this executive order. Again, I think, and Beth reiterated this, I think everybody is in this to try to ensure that we have the best, most adequate staffing possible under this very difficult time. And so I think we're all in this together to make sure that schools remain open and fully staffed. And there's just, it takes a lot of cooperation and effort. But again, retirees with questions, please direct those to CalSTRS.com, and our folks in customer service will be able to better address and take into those unique circumstances and situations a retiree may have. So again, Beth, thank you so much for being here today. We really, really appreciate it. I know you're exhausted because we've been having this conversation a lot recently. So thank you for your availability.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And with that, I think we're going to move on to, I don't see any raised hands or anything. So we're going to move to Karen Doran. Karen is our Director of Communications, and she and her team have been working on CalSTRS.com and modernizing and updating the look and feel of the website. It is expected to go live before our next EAC meeting in May. And so we want to just make sure that folks were not surprised by that. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Karen.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to see all of you. I think this is my first time presenting at this particular event, so I'm excited to be here. So as Diane mentioned, we've been working on the CalSTRS.com modernization update or modernization. And this is part of the CalSTRS strategic and business plan. So it was one of our objectives for over the last 3 years. And what we've done is the goals of the new website are to update the look, feel, and navigation with the best and latest design principles while sticking with our brand, mission, and vision. And this is the really important part. We wanted to center the user's experience with members as the #1 top priority. And I'm going to share my screen in a minute so I can show you how that's turned out. We also wanted to make it easy to navigate and mobile friendly, and have an improved search function. So those are the 4 key goals for the new website. I'll just kind of give you an update of where we are right now. We're getting super close to being able to launch. All the content from the old website has been moved to the new website. We've been doing some internal reviews with all the different business areas to make sure the content that's important is there and in the right places. We're doing a quality review, which is also almost complete. And we are implementing a communications plan, which includes internal and external communications, of which this meeting is one of those. And it'll include email to members, a news release. We'll have a video showing how to use the new site. We'll announce it on our social media and in member newsletters and in various stakeholder communications. The current schedule is to do a soft launch in mid-February and a public launch in mid-March. And what that means is when we're doing the soft launch, when you go to the current CalSTRS.com, you'll see a little drop-down tab at the top of the page that says, new CalSTRS.com coming soon. Click here if you'd like to check it out now. And that'll be kind of running in the background for a few weeks, and then we'll flip the switch and they'll trade places. And we'll have, when you go to CalSTRS.com on the launch date, you'll see the new website, but we'll still have a little tab at the top where the old website will live for a couple of weeks, just in case you want to go back and check if there's something that you're looking for and you need to find it on the old website, you can do that. But my hope is that we've improved the navigation so much that you won't need to do that. And so now what I'm going to do is show you the new website. I have a demo site that I can pull up on my screen now. So I'm actually going to start sharing my screen, which means other people will stop sharing. Here we go. So just if I can get a thumbs up or a nod, hopefully everyone can see that. Diane, can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, great, fantastic. Okay, so here we are. This is the new CalSTRS.com. And as you can see, we have simplified the top level navigation and made it much easier to see, to just see one list of information that you can drill down into if you're looking for specifics. We've got pay dates here at the top. The My CalSTRS login is still very prominent up here. And this section here is actually available as a carousel. So if we have more than one really important thing that we want to highlight, we can actually have this as a rotating slideshow here at the top of the page. And I'm going to scroll down a little bit so you can see the whole home page. In the middle here, we have more member resources. This section here is also a carousel that can be used to display multiple important announcements. If you continue scrolling, you'll see our news and update section. Again, another area of the website that can be updated easily and changed with important information. Continuing to scroll down, we've got more helpful links for members by milestone, career stage, and just sort of some of the frequently asked questions. And here at the bottom, we're going to hold this space to highlight our sustainable efforts as an organization. And I'm going to scroll back up here now and talk a little bit about the color choices that we've made. We've dialed down the red from the old website and are using it to highlight important information rather than having it be everywhere. We've used some of the colors that we're using in our publications so that all of our materials, whether they're in print or online, all have a similar look and feel. And we've actually tied colors to the various career stages. So if you go to the early career page on this website, the colors that we use for the icons there will match the colors that are available or that are shown on the member publications. So now I'm just going to show you a few of the interior pages. So we'll switch here to members. And again, if you clicked on this members button, link here, it would bring you to this page. And we've again tried to make it super easy for members to navigate to the information that's important to them, whether it's based on their career stage, job and life changes, benefits planning, attendance at webinars, all of that. And we've got this great imagery that we're using in the middle to call your attention to important information. And then I know you all want to see the employer section, so I'm going to land. Oh, that's employers next. Member publications. I thought this would be a useful piece of information for all of you to have that we've got. If you go to forms and publications, you click right here, you'll get to all the member publications. And again, we've got some really great way to display publications that looks a lot better than it did on the old website. It's all here. And then I will go to the employer site. And we've made the navigation very simple. Circulars, directives, audits, tools and resources, and then a link to the secure employer website. Click on tools and resources so you can see what that is. It's got the employer support portal and 403B comply and the secure employer website. So very, very simple and clean. It's looking really good. And that is everything that I wanted to show on the design. I'll go back to the home page. The next steps are to complete the touch-up of the interior pages. We are also doing user testing with a group of retired members and a group of active members. So we've actually got a software tool that we're using where we send it out to this group of members who have volunteered to help, and they will be trying to perform some tasks on the website, and that will help us just fine tune the navigation and make sure that all the information really is easy to find. And as I mentioned, we'll be doing the soft launch in mid-February and the full launch in March. So does anyone have questions?
Karen, I'm not seeing anything.
Great.
No raised hands, no Q&A, so it looks great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I'm going to stop sharing and I'll hang out for a few minutes too if anyone.
Wonderful. Again, we just wanted to make sure that folks weren't surprised. Not sure how often folks visit the CalSTRS.com website, but obviously didn't want that to be a surprise if it was not daily, which is how often I'm there. With that, I think we're ready for our training with Jennifer. So Jennifer is going to do some training related to the defined benefit membership. And again, if we've got questions, we've got some folks in the background that can be fielding and monitoring those questions. I think she also, much like Beth, will kind of pause as questions may be asked in the moment. And again, I wanted to reiterate that the slides, both these slides as well as the slides that Beth presented on the governor's executive order, are available on the EAC website. So that's a tool and a resource that's available for folks who aren't able to join us today, but may, again, be able to review this meeting at a future date. And then, of course, the materials are still present. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer.
Hi, thank you, Diane, for that welcome. Again, my name is Jennifer. I'm a trainer on your employer services team. Before we dive into defined benefit membership, I do want to look at a circular that we shared just recently. And then in the background today, I do have Megan Wallach and Mia Tanoia Hill. They're both helping me out with the Q&A. So how we'll handle questions as we go through. You can type those questions in the Q&A. Megan or Mia will help you out. And then we'll go back and review periodically also, and I'll stop for questions along the way. And then you can also use that raise hand function. So let me share my screen. All right, so this employer information circular was posted in January, and this is geared towards payments related to teacher shortages. So with COVID going on, we've gotten a lot of inquiries about teacher shortages, other teachers filling in. So we put this together to try to address some of the most common questions that we've seen. It's certainly not all inclusive. So if you have something that falls outside of this, we definitely would love to see some documentation. You can email us at employertraining@calstrs.com and we'll review that. But I do want to take a moment to look through this before we move into defined benefit membership. So we talk here about employment as a substitute teacher. Nothing there has changed. You are reporting your substitutes under assignment code 54. But then another common scenario we've been seeing is taking on an additional teaching assignment. So if your full-time or part-time teachers are taking on additional teaching assignments, maybe they're teaching during the prep period or their zero period, that work is being considered an additional assignment. So they're not a substitute, right? They're still a teacher, they're just doing additional teaching duties. So we consider that an additional assignment, and compensation associated with that is considered salary. And those are going to be reported under assignment code 55. So different than your standard substitute, they're still in their full or part-time position, but they're doing additional duties. We also address in here excess students, whether it's in a time-based measure or non-time-based measure. Nothing there has changed, but just kind of including that information. So if you run into that scenario, for the time-based measure, if they are on a written contract that has a class size maximum and they are compensated for excess, that's associated with a time base. So meaning full-time is defined through the days or hours. that extra compensation is considered special pay. Then if you look at our non-time-based measure down below, the non-time-based measure, again, we're looking at on a written contract with a class size maximum compensation there is associated with a non-time-based measure. So that means full times based on maybe load credits or something similar. You see that more commonly at community colleges. That compensation is reportable as additional service. So just kind of highlighting the difference between that time-based and non-time-based there. And then another scenario that we've been seeing are class coverage. So if you have that full or part-time teacher who is compensated for covering a class, or maybe a portion of a class in addition to their normal classroom instruction, that compensation, as long as it's not associated with that contractual maximum there, it's going to be reportable as additional service. So similar to what we looked at up above with our filling in. So again, reported with assignment code 55 there. All right, so I just wanted to point that out because that's new for our circulars. And if you're not familiar, that is just on CalSTRS.com under employers and those employer information circulars. All right, I'll pause for a moment for questions as I get my screen set up to look at defined benefit membership. Sorry about that. That was from our preview earlier. We were making sure our slides work. All right, so let me take a peek at the Q&A. Don't see anything.
Don't see anything coming in yet, Jen.
Perfect. Thank you, Megan. All right, so I'm excited to share a defined benefit membership training with you today because we've made some updates to this based on feedback that we get from employers. We've updated this with more examples, and then we also get into reporting and enrollment codes. So we've added some information to that to hopefully help you out more in your day-to-day job. So when we talk about CalSTRS defined benefit membership, I like to talk about membership in general before we dive into CalSTRS membership. If you think about a common membership you might have, maybe you have a Costco membership or a gym membership, you pay that fee so that you have access to a benefit that not everybody has access to, right? If you're paying for a Costco membership, you're paying that membership so you have the benefit of shopping there. Defined benefit membership is very much the same. You are paying into CalSTRS defined benefit membership as the employer, and the employee is paying in as well. The benefit for the employee is they're going to get that lifetime monthly benefit when they retire down the road. But as the employer, there's some benefits there for you as well. Not every employer offers a pension anymore. So hopefully that's going to be a really excellent recruitment and retainment tool for you. Because again, you're offering a benefit that not everybody has access to. So as we move through our materials today, we have some objectives that we're going to cover. Our first objective here, we're going to talk about how somebody becomes a CalSTRS member. So we'll look at the different types of positions and how they might come into defined benefit membership. We're also going to cover retirement system election eligibility. So a lot of times at our districts, we have employees who move between PERS and STRS covered positions. So we'll talk about who's eligible to make that election and how that happens. We'll dive into employer responsibilities related to defined benefit membership. There we'll talk about different forms that you are going to make available to your employees, different timelines associated with electing defined benefit membership. And then lastly, as we move through, we're also going to talk about enrolling and reporting employees. All right, so as we move through our material, we've changed up our format a little bit with this, and we're looking at a series of guided questions. So when you're considering defined benefit membership, these are the questions that you can ask yourself as you take yourself through the process to consider if somebody is eligible to be a defined benefit member. So our first question here is, are they employed to perform creditable service? Remember, creditable service is really the foundation of everything CalSTRS. If they're not performing creditable service, they're not going to be eligible for defined benefit membership. So a quick recall for creditable service here. Remember, to be performing creditable service, they must be employed by an employer. So that's our county offices of education, our pre-K through 12 school districts, our community college districts, and then charters that elect to participate in CalSTRS. Next up, the position must meet the minimum requirements or be exempt. Remember, your minimum requirements vary based on your employer type. And then lastly, the employee is performing a creditable service activity. So those are those activities laid out in Education Code 22119.5, B1 through 9. So that's anywhere from teaching to counseling, our health services, administration. That could also be outgrowth. Remember, for outgrowth to be creditable, it does have to be performed in conjunction with another creditable service activity for the same employer in the same fiscal year. If I just threw a lot of information at you with that one, remember we have our creditable service module available on Palms. You can go on Palms and review it as a CBT. You can also check out, we do our teachers retirement law trainings on a regular basis, and you could join us for an instructor-led training for that. And then one last note before we move forward, you'll notice that education code that I quoted is at the bottom of the slide there. As we move through our materials, we always quote the education code. So if you want to go back and reference that on your own, that's an easy point to pick that up. All right. I'll pause for just a moment, make sure we don't have any questions on creditable service, and then we will look at retirement system elections. Don't see anything popping up, so let's dive right into retirement system elections. So the first question that we asked ourselves is, are they performing creditable service? But retirement system elections kind of throw a wrench into that, right? Because some employees might not be performing a creditable service activity, but they might be eligible for a retirement system election. So these are those people that we talked about that maybe they're moving between positions between PERS and STRS. So this section here, we're going to talk about CalSTRS elections, but there are also CalPERS elections. So there are a few key points that an employee must hit to be eligible to make a retirement system election. So the first one there is that they must be a CalSTRS defined benefit member. So to be able to make an election, they must already be a member. And then they take a position that requires coverage by another public retirement system. They may elect CalSTRS defined benefit program coverage for that service. So a common example of this that we see is maybe a teacher moving out of teaching into human resources. That human resources position, full-time position, would typically require coverage by another public retirement system, in this case PERS, although they're not the only one. So they're already a defined benefit member. They take a position that requires coverage. They can elect to have CalSTRS continue to cover that service. So when we look at retirement system elections, the employer does have to provide that retirement system election form, or ES-372, to that eligible employee within 10 days of hire. And then the employee has 60 days to sign that form. This one's a little bit different. We'll talk about the ES-350 that you're likely aware of also. That one doesn't have a timeline, but it's important to remember that ES-372, they only have 60 days to make that election. And then once the member signs the form, it does have to be received by CalSTRS within 60 days of the employee's signature date. Employers are required to keep a copy for your own records. However, you are no longer required to send a copy of that ES-372 to the other retirement system. And coverage is going to be effective the first day of employment in that position. Now, if you think about those timelines that we covered, the employee has 60 days to make that election. So while you're waiting on the member to make that election, you want to report the employee to the default retirement system. And then if they do make a retirement system election, you may need to back out and re-report that compensation to the retirement system that they elect. So let's look at an example of a CalSTRS retirement system election. So in our example here, Poe is a CalSTRS member and accepts a human resources position with Yavin USD that requires CalPERS coverage. So remember that key there is that that new position that they're accepting requires CalPERS coverage. So he is eligible to make that retirement system election because it requires CalPERS coverage, and they elect to have that position covered by CalSTRS. So that service is going to be creditable to CalSTRS. So you have your CalSTRS elections, but on the flip side, you can also, your employees can also make a retirement system election for CalPERS. So CalPERS members employed in a position that again requires defined benefit coverage can elect CalPERS coverage in lieu of the defined benefit program. We do recommend that you see CalPERS for more information here on election eligibility and employer responsibilities. And if CalPERS is elected here, you don't have to enroll the employee, send enrollment forms, or report compensation to CalSTRS. Do you see a question? So this one we'll go ahead and tackle. So what if the employee does not return the ES-372 form within the 60 days? In that case, that window has passed, so they're not going to be eligible to make that retirement system election after that 60 days. It looks like Megan's typing an answer in there too, so she might add something to that. But yeah, typically if they miss that window, there's no retirement system election and they're going to be reported to their default retirement system.
Hey, Jen, for questions, we'll let you take them live. I am going to type up responses to them after the fact or while you talk,
Okay.
just so that we have that Q&A report. And we will send that Q&A report out to attendees with a separate email from the training team, along with a link to the survey where you can provide feedback on today's training. So we like to have those questions answered for you in writing, just so you have it to refer back to, in addition to Jennifer clarifying it verbally for you.
So let's look at our other, we have another question. During the PERS section, it was mentioned as a scenario that if we hired a sub teacher and they were both a PERS and STRS member, since they would mandatorily have to be put into STRS, they may have the option to elect PERS instead with the ES-372 for their sub time. So if that substitute position required defined benefit member coverage, they may be able to elect CalPERS. And we actually have some examples of that coming up for PERS elections. That's actually in our next few slides. So I will let Mia type our answer out to that. And then I think these next coming slides will answer that question for you as well. So we have 3 examples here to look at for CalPERS retirement system elections. So in our example here, our employee Ray is a CalPERS member and they accept a full-time teaching position with a school district. They then make a retirement system election and they elect CalPERS for that coverage. So then in this first example here, Ray teaches an extra class period beyond her full-time assignment. So because that extra period is an additional assignment, and remember, it's an additional assignment, they already made their election for the full-time teaching position. They elected CalPERS for that. So this service is not going to be creditable to CalSTRS because it's an additional assignment on top of the full-time assignment that they already made that retirement system election for. So even though the employee can't necessarily receive more than 1 year of service credit or service in excess of a year with CalPERS, doesn't mean that that additional assignment can be reported to CalSTRS. Similar example here, again, our Ray is a CalPERS member and accepts a full-time teaching position, makes that retirement system election and elects CalPERS. And then this time Ray accepts an outgrowth assignment as the science club advisor. So this outgrowth assignment is not going to be creditable either because she's not performing a creditable service activity with CalSTRS. Remember, for outgrowth to be creditable, it does have to be performed for the same employer in the same fiscal year. So the outgrowth that that assignment, the outgrowth that is the assignment, that outgrowth the assignment is tied to, she already made that CalPERS election, right? So again, even though you can't earn more than that 1 year of service credit with CalPERS, doesn't mean that it can then in turn be reported to CalSTRS. And then this one, I think we'll look at, this will look more at our question that we had just a moment ago. So again, CalPERS member accepts a full-time teaching position. She makes that retirement system election again and elects CalPERS. Now this time Ray accepts a separate position as a substitute. So this substitute position is a separate position. So it's going to be evaluated independently from the position that Ray made a CalPERS election for. So while the service is creditable to CalSTRS, they may still be able to elect CalPERS coverage if that substitute position requires DB coverage. So that's typically if they were already a member. If it doesn't require then the position would be covered by CalSTRS. So I hope that kind of went back. I hope that was a good example that addressed our Q&A from earlier also. All right, I see that the Q&A is going, so let's take a look at our answered questions here. Let's go over Mia's response. Yes, if they're a CalSTRS member, so this is in reference to the PERS section and then mandatorily having to be put into STRS, or if they have the option to elect using that ES 372 for their subtime. So if they're a CalSTRS member, any position performing creditable service requires CalSTRS coverage at the time of hire. So if they meet those other CalPERS requirements for retirement system election, they can elect CalPERS on that ES 372. But we do always refer you to CalPERS. You know, we work very similarly and we work hand in hand, but there are still some nuances. So double check with CalPERS to make sure they meet those election requirements. And then we had a question, I'll go back and recap. We have a very high number of new district HR personnel. Does an employee have any recourse if the district did not provide the form within 10 days of hire and they missed that election window? So in that case, that's kind of one of those one-offs where we would say it depends, right? If that happens, we ask that the employer reach out and contact CalSTRS, and we can work with each of them based on the scenario. And you can always send those into employerhelp@calstrs.com. All right. I think I have another one popping over to the answered. Do these parameters apply to CCD as well as K through 12? Lost my track of my Q&A. There it is. And that's correct. Yeah, the requirements for a retirement system apply regardless of your employer type. I have another question here. If we have a PERS member who has 5 years vested with PERS, then offered a temporary assignment to a teaching position, a full time of 6 months, is the employee eligible for a retirement election? So this one is going to fall under CalPERS laws. So temporary requirements do not require CalSTRS coverage unless the employee was already a member. So if it's a non-member, they may not qualify, but again, verify that with CalPERS. If I'm missing any here.
We do have a hand raised.
All righty. So do we want to go ahead? I see Mia and Megan are both, I'm sure, furiously typing in the background. If we want to take our raised hand, I'll let Megan and Mia work on those lingering questions we have there.
Hi, this is Lena from Orange County.
Yes.
Dina, I think you remuted yourself.
I'm sorry, Mina. I accidentally muted you.
Okay, can you go over one more time about a teacher who elected PERS as their retirement system, who made the election, who was eligible, and now they accepted a substitute teaching position, which is a different position than they did their election for? I thought I heard you saying that they can make an election for that sub position.
They may. So it would, so when we evaluate that, and that's the screen that we're still on here. So when they accept a separate position as a substitute, that service is creditable to CalSTRS, but they may still be able to elect CalPERS if the substitute position requires defined benefit coverage. So that was kind of the sticking point with that. If the substitute required defined benefit coverage, so that would typically happen like if the employee was already a member. And then Mia expanded on that. Let me go back to our Q&A.
Because I thought the substitute, it has to be if there's qualifying position, and substitute position will not be a qualifying STRS position.
So they're not typically a substitute positions, typically not going to require CalSTRS coverage. But remember, if they are already a CalSTRS member, any position performing creditable service would require CalSTRS coverage at the time of hire. So then if they were already a member hired into a substitute positions, if they met those CalPERS requirements for a retirement system election, they may be able to elect CalPERS on that ES 372. So that's not as common, and that might be what's throwing you off there. Not as common that we see that, but if they were already a member, that position would require CalPERS coverage, or I'm sorry, CalSTRS coverage.
Okay, because somehow I thought the position has to be each election is by position. So even though if they are a member of STRS, but they did not make an election to this new sub-position, substitute position. So I somehow thought it has to be even a qualifying position to make an election, even though they are a member of STRS system.
So it is by, I mean, what you're saying there is correct. It is by position, and it is, and in this specific scenario and example we used, because they were already a member, it required coverage. So you are looking at it position by position, but if they were already a member and then they're substituting, that does still require. Now, whether or not that meets the CalPERS side of things and the other requirements that they have for a retirement system election, that might be different depending on the actual position.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
So Jen, can I clarify a little bit here? Because we've had several questions in the chat, and then piggybacking on questions on the chat that are hard to follow because they're trying to refer to the original question. So CalPERS, if you're talking about the CalPERS election, we can't advise you on the CalPERS election because they have additional requirements about vesting or other things outside of our control. One of the requirements of the CalPERS election is that the position requires CalSTRS coverage. So that's where we can advise you if the position requires CalSTRS coverage. And in fact, CalPERS will reach out to us to verify that when they get an election form, they work with us on that. So in terms of substitutes and any of these positions that are excluded from mandatory membership, it will depend if they require CalSTRS coverage, got to make sure I say the right system there, on whether or not they're already a member. So if you already have someone who's a CalSTRS member, any position that they take is going to require DB coverage, right? So that would make them check that box on the CalPERS election, and you'd have to refer to CalPERS on the other requirements related to the vesting or their membership status with CalPERS and things like that. If they are not already a DB member, substitutes, part-time, hourly, and dailies, folks below 50% of a full-time equivalent, and your temporary or adjunct employees do not require membership at employment, and they would not meet that piece of the CalPERS election requirement because they're not requiring coverage at employment. So we've had questions sometimes, well, what if the substitute hits the 100 days and then they require coverage? Nope, it has to be at employment that they meet that requirement. So I hope that answers some of the questions I saw popping up. If not, I'll go back in and continue to try to respond to those one-offs, but I saw a lot of the same type of one, and I hope I got them all. If not, I will follow up with you and get that clear for you.
All right. right, and taking a peek at what else we had going on in the Q&A. Looks like a lot. I think Megan addressed a lot of these. We're looking at those CalPERS elections. I've been highlighting, yeah, if they're hired, it has to be at the time of hire. They have to require coverage at the time of hire.
Jennifer, Tammy has a question about summer school. While Megan and Mia answer some of those other questions, do you want to address the summer school one?
Sure, let's see what we have in our open. Is summer school considered a separate position in regards to the ES 372 form? Let's see, summer school. You know, Megan, I think I might ask for your weigh in on summer school with that one. Would we consider summer school a separate position?
I think that would be up to the employer. So sometimes, you know, summer school isn't a separate position. It's just an additional assignment that your regular teachers are doing outside of the school term or during your intersession, or sometimes they might have a pool of candidates that they hire specifically for summer school. So I think that that would be employer driven, and we would rely on you telling us whether or not it's a separate position. If it is in fact a separate position, you would treat it like any other position and evaluate it for that ES 372 right of election, just like any other position you would do. But we wouldn't really be able to tell you that. I think that it could go either way depending on how your employment works for those folks.
Thank you, Megan. All right, and then I see another one came in for full training on the ES 372 form. And since there are many new members to the SEAC group, would it be possible to have a session with STRS and PERS in the room together to answer these questions? This was done a few times in the past, but it's been several years. Having both retirement systems present has been very helpful in the past. Megan, I'm going to ping you for that one again. I believe that we've done like STRS and PERS together before. Certainly something that we can look into.
Yeah, we've done that at a couple of different forums, and I think potentially EAC is another great forum. There's, you know, not everybody is a member of all of the same groups, and so I'm happy to partner with CalPERS on that sort of conversation so that you can get all those questions, because I'm sure it's hard for them when they get questions about our side and they can't really speak to it, and vice versa. So I'm happy to reach out to them and connect with folks and see if we can get something on an EAC agenda related to that, and any other forums that you have that you'd like us to attend and do some of that. I'm sure we'd be open if they have the resources and the timing works out.
All right, back at our Q&A, talked about summer school 372. I see Megan and Mia typing there. All right. So lots of really great questions on retirement system elections. I know those can be very sticky. If you have any specific scenarios that you want us to look at, by all means, send us some documentation and some details, and we'll always be happy to review those with you. So let's look back at our presentation. So remember, the first question that we asked was, are they performing creditable service? And then if they're not performing creditable service, were they eligible for a retirement system election? So the next question that we're going to ask is, do they require defined benefit coverage at employment? So once you've established they're performing creditable service, we want to figure out, are they requiring coverage now, or are we going to continue monitoring? So to verify an employee status, you can look up their membership status in REAP. So you can look them up on the Remote Employer Access Program, or you can run a match file to query multiple accounts. So if you verify their status in there and they are already a member, you are going to keep in mind that all positions to perform creditable service require defined benefit coverage, regardless of their basis of employment. So if they're already a member, you are going to report compensation using member code 1 and the assignment code for the position. Now, if they're not already a member, it's going to depend on your employer type who is going to require coverage. So at our county offices of education, our pre-K through 12, and our charter schools that elect CalSTRS coverage, 50% or more of a full-time contract is going to require defined benefit coverage. Now, keep in mind, multiple part-time positions do not add up for mandatory membership purposes. Those employees can still permissively elect at any time, which we'll cover in an upcoming section. They're just not going to mandate membership at that time. For membership dates, membership begins the first day of employment. Now, as the employer, you do get to determine what that first day of employment is. It might be the day they sign their contract, maybe their first day in the classroom. You determine that, but you do have to remain consistent in how you apply that. So these employees here, so they are in that 50% or more of a full-time contract. You enroll them using transaction code 11 and report their compensation using member code 1 and assignment code 57. Now, at our community college districts, our positions that require DB membership at employment are going to be those non-temporary and non-adjunct employees. Now, again, your temporary and adjunct can still elect, permissively elect CalSTRS membership. They're just not mandated at employment. So again, here membership begins the first day of employment, and you are going to enroll using transaction code 11. And you report their compensation using member code 1 and assignment code 57. So just a quick recap there. Those are the positions that require defined benefit membership upon coverage. So, you know, if they're in 50% or more of a full-time contract at a COE pre-K through 12 or charter school, they are enrolled in defined benefit on that first day of employment. And at our CCDs, it is those non-temporary, non-adjunct positions. All right, so what questions do you have on positions that require defined benefit membership before we talk about how they might later become a member? Take a moment and peek at our Q&A. Been talking a lot today. All right, don't see anything coming in there. It's a little bit easier to apply than those retirement system elections, right? All right, so there are positions that don't require DB membership upon employment. So if they're not already a member, they don't require membership, the next thing you're going to ask is what next happens for them to become a member. So first up, excuse me, let's look at positions that do not require defined benefit membership. So at our pre-K through 12, our COEs and our charter schools, that's going to include substitutes, part-time hourly, part-time daily, and then there's those less than 50% of a full-time contract. And at our community college districts, those are our temporary and adjunct employees. You'll see that assignment code listed down below there. That is how you are going to report their compensation for those specific employee types. And again, remember that non-members can permissively elect membership at any time while they are employed to perform creditable service. So for enrolling and reporting defined benefit non-members, you're going to enroll those who don't require DB membership using transaction code 2, and you're going to report their compensation using member code 2 and the assignment code for the position. Now it is important we get that non-member reporting, because if those employees decide in the future to go back and purchase that time, that's how we know how much service is available there to purchase. So you're still reporting that non-member time to us. Now, for a permissive election of defined benefit membership, responsibilities of the employer is to provide that permissive membership form, or ES-350, within 30 days of hire. And then the form has to be received by CalSTRS within 60 days of the employee's signature date. So remember, this is a little bit different than the ES-372. Remember there, they had 60 days to complete the form. This one's more open-ended. You provide it within 30 days, but they don't necessarily have a timeline to return that, because they can always permissively elect defined benefit membership. Now, you are required to retain a copy. Even if the member declines, the employee declines, you do want to retain a copy of your own records to show that you did offer that form within that 30-day window. And then when we look at membership dates for permissive election, the employee can elect a membership date no earlier than the first day of the pay period in which the election is made, or the date of hire, whichever is later. Now, these are the earliest dates that they can elect. They can also select a future date, but this is just setting the earliest dates. And I know that's a little bit wordy there, so we'll look at an example in just a moment that will lay out the timeline to clarify that. Now, if our employee permissively elects defined benefit coverage, you are going to enroll them using transaction code 81 and report their compensation using member code 1 and that assignment code for the position that we looked at just a couple of slides ago. All right, and then just a reminder here too, when you provide this form, this is the contract between CalSTRS and the employee. So your role in this form is to certify that the information on the form is correct and then process that enrollment so that you can start reporting that compensation to CalSTRS. So let's look at an example of a permissive election and look at those dates and those earliest membership dates that they can elect. So in this example, Mr. Bond is a non-member employed as a substitute teacher on January 15th and receives his ES-350. So if he completes that ES-350 in January, he can elect a membership date as early as January 15th. Again, remember, it's just that's as early as he can elect. He can also future date that form. And then if he waits to make that election in February, he can elect a membership date as early as February 1st. So I also like to point out here that when you provide that form to the employee is going to have an impact on how early of a membership date that they can elect. So in our time frame here, say that Mr. Bond was hired January 15th, and maybe you don't get around to providing that ES-350 until early February. That's impacted that earliest membership date. So I just always like to point that out because the earlier you can get that form to your employee, the sooner they can elect membership if they would like to. All right, I do see a raised hand if we want to take a moment and take our question from Valerie.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. So in that circumstance, we have a lot of districts that don't seem to understand when to provide the forms to the soon-to-be employees. So they're doing it way ahead of schedule. And then by the time we get it and I email them and say, hey, no, they can't elect before the position hire date, have them re-sign the form. Now they're 60 days, 90 days, just depends past that date. So then they can't backdate that to their first date position, even though that's what they had wanted.
I see Megan coming up mute. This is I know we've seen some kind of different circumstances with that. So I'll let Megan go ahead and field this one.
Okay.
Yeah, so ideally the districts wouldn't be giving them the form until they've been employed in the position and all of that. We do realize that some of the packets go out early and different districts have different interpretations of when they consider them employed, and that's fine. If someone signs the form early, we will not reject it so long as the employer is verifying that they're entitled to the position and membership date and verifying that they meet that criteria. So if the member signed the form or the employee signed the form early, and then you want to hold on to it until closer to when they actually start and then enroll them and submit that, we will no longer be rejecting those forms with the earlier signature date because we realize that that's just how it happens. And then sometimes by the time it gets rejected and then you get it back, then when they correct it, then they're outside of their window period to time that election with their start date. So we'll be flexible on when they're signed earlier, so long as the employer is verifying that they're eligible for the position and all of the rest of that form is complete.
Okay, that brings up two more questions for me. And one, I love that. I think that's great. Is it in writing somewhere? And what do I do with, I've got a couple right now that they've already re-signed and dated them. So now do I have them go back and do it again with the old date?
Let's connect offline on that. If you can send those ones into employer help and we can work with your representative on the facts of that specific case and what's easier and requires the least amount of rework.
Okay.
We'll work with all that. As far as the date piece, it says that the election has to be made or can be made anytime while they're employed to perform credible service. So if you're telling us that they're employed when they signed it, then we'll take it. And that's kind of all, I mean, that's all within the law already. So I don't know what additional information we would provide on that. But
well, I think it's just hard because the rules seem to go back and forth, and which ones do we follow and when is it changed? So having something in writing that's very articulate as to what is actually allowed is helpful.
yes, I will take that back to our communication folks. But I will say, I mean, ideally they wouldn't be providing them, months and months ahead of somebody actually becoming employed, that they would wait until they are employed and only providing the form to the folks that are truly eligible. Cause I know sometimes they're just kind of in everyone's packet. So we still want the districts to be trained to that standard, but we will make the exception if they are signed early, because oftentimes by the time we reject it, then like I said, the timing of it, it's punitive to the member when they're, trying to make an election and time it with their start date. Right. So let me take that back to our communication folks and see what we can provide, if anything. But the standard that we want to train our districts to is that, they're not providing it to everybody. They're only providing it to the folks that are eligible, and they're only and that they're providing it once they're employed.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And Valerie, do you mind sharing what employer you're with, just so we can keep an eye out for your inquiry?
Ventura County Office of Ed.
Perfect. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I saw a question come in. Stephanie was asking, can you provide an example of dates for signing early? I think Cindy provides one here in the Q&A as well. We have districts that onboard, so these forms are signed earlier than the true hire date in their system. So Cindy kind of provided an example there. And then I know a common one that we see sometimes is employers will sometimes hand those ES-350s out at like a job fair. So maybe those, maybe those prospective employees don't ever end up working for you. So sometimes we get ES-350s. They're not in our system. We don't know who they belong to. So those are two examples there. I mean, job fairs, we've seen them come in, and then sometimes those districts are onboarding and signing higher than their true hire date. I see Veronica, Megan answering, if we receive rejected forms due to early signature dates, do we return them to the ES forms queue? I'll let Megan handle that one, and we'll go back and recap that in just a minute.
So if anyone has that situation, if you want to just reach out to employer help about those particular cases, and then we can research them and get back to you on whatever is going to be the easiest thing to do that requires the least amount of rework for everybody. And we'll work with you on those. So if you have gotten some rejected for that signature thing, we'll take a look at those. There might be other things wrong with the form that need to be corrected anyways, potentially. But if it simply is a signature date, but we'll do another review on that and get back to you to make sure what needs to be done so that we can get those approved and that the member is entitled to the date they have.
So Teresa, I would say what Megan just answered applies there as well. So you've been told if signed at a job fair in April where they would hire with a later hire date of August, those were being returned as the employee cannot sign before their hire date. I would say, again, work through those with employer help, submit those, and we can go back and re-review those and do them, like Megan said, with as little rework as possible. Stephanie had another one. Will you accept the form if the election date says first date of hire? I believe we'd actually need I'm assuming, Stephanie, you mean they're like writing that in, but we would need an actual date. But if we want to let Stephanie unmute and expand on that.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so I guess what I'm asking is, so we hire subs and we don't consider the first date of work until they actually accept a position. So the reason I was asking for an example, if they sign the form today, February 2nd, and then the first date of hire was not till February 24th. What we're having to do then is have the person come back in and fill that date in on the form. And are you saying that what we can do, where I was asking about the first date of hire, is if they're showing their intent is to have that day? We're having a lot of back and forth with these forms to get all these dates to line up.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I'm asking, can we ask what their intent is and then fill in that date? Or, so if they sign it and then the date is filled in, because we don't know when that first date of hire is going to be, when they're actually put into the system.
Mm-hmm.
So if we don't know the date of hire, then you wouldn't be able to certify their eligibility for the position because they have to be hired to be eligible for the position. So where we're providing wiggle room are on those situations where, someone receives their HR packet of materials a week before, a couple weeks before their hire date, and they're signing and filling out documents. And then that form, has a date that's a little bit earlier. But the job fair situation and things where forms are just being handed out to people who may or may not become employed, they have to be hired to perform creditable service, and the employer has to certify that. So that's, sorry if I wasn't clear on that, but that's the distinction we're providing, is the example of someone just signed their document a little bit early because they had their hands on it a little bit before their hire date. We're not going to go back and make you change that if you've already certified that, they're eligible, they have the hire date, and everything else on the form is complete. So does that answer your question, Stephanie?
I'll send you an example, Megan, just to make sure. I think, I'm not worried. I understand the job fair and I completely agree. I think it's more when people come in to sign up as a sub and the district doesn't view them as an employee until they actually take a job. So that's where you're going to have that disconnect. So
okay, yes. And so we have different employers view that differently from what I've heard. And we leave it on you guys because you guys determine hire date. So if you're like, hey, they're on the sub list, we consider them an employee of the district, you can give them the form when they're employed, and maybe they sub, maybe they don't. But they can process the form, and any job they take would be subject to coverage. If you don't view them hired until they actually take their first sub position, then you'd want to wait until they actually take that position because they're not actually eligible in your eyes because they're not employed. And then those ones, we would see that come in later.
Okay.
But if you have more examples, Stephanie, send them in. I'm happy to review them with you.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Megan, and then Teresa asked, and correct me if I'm wrong, but she asked, when did this rule change? And I don't know that any rules necessarily change, but we're trying to work with our employers and give them as much wiggle room as like the law allows.
Yeah, so the rule hasn't changed. We're trying to be more flexible because we understand on the rejection piece for the examples that Stephanie had just given or we just discussed. So when someone signs their paperwork a couple days early, a couple weeks early or something, they're preparing to be employed, the employer certifies the hire date and it's fine. I think I might have misspoke or gave the wrong interpretation that, you can just hand out the form anytime and if that's allowed. That's not the case. So there is no change. We're just being more flexible on when we reject those for the hire date. If some of you guys are still getting those rejections and it's only due to the hire date, send that in and we can look at those and connect with you and see what's going on there. But we are trying to be, and again, we still want the districts to be trained to don't provide the form until you consider them hired and don't do all of that. But if they do happen to do it early, we don't want to penalize the member and then them lose out on a couple weeks of retirement credit while we reject the form and you get it re-signed and then, they miss a month or two of retirement credit. We want to make sure we're not penalizing the member for the employer being proactive and giving it to them too early. I do think we need to move on this point. If you do have additional questions on this, you can email employertraining@calstrs.com and we can work with you one-off on it. But I do think we need to move on in the sake of time so that we can get through the rest of the module and any other questions that you have. And then we also have some other announcements and stuff to cover as well.
All right. Thank you, Megan. I do want to address Cindy's really quick before we move on. Districts are leaving the enrollment date undated, hoping for us at the county to fill it out as they don't understand what date to enter. Can we at the county enter the hire date as the enrollment date? What's really important in this form I mentioned before is this is the contract between CalSTRS and the employee. So you don't want to be filling out that form on the employee's behalf. So really they should be being dated before they leave the district. All right, so as Megan said, to move along and make sure we have time to cover everything else, we'll move along with our permissive elections. But again, make sure, don't forget you can send us documentation at any time and we can review that. So we left off with our Mr. Bond permissively electing. We were talking about their membership dates. So if they do elect membership, if they elect that permissively elect defined benefit membership, remember all creditable service requires defined benefit coverage, and then any existing cash balance accounts and alternative retirement program accounts must be closed. So our next question in our set of guided questions that we move through. So remember our last one is, did they require coverage? Do they later become a member? So if the employee does not permissively elect, there are positions that you need to monitor for mandatory membership purposes. Now, this could be a change in their basis of employment. So if they change their basis of employment, you do need to evaluate each new position for membership and establish membership if needed. And then you're also going to report base hours so that we can track these mandatory membership thresholds that we are about to review. Oh, there it is. Sorry about that. So at our pre-K through 12, our COEs and our charter schools, if you don't offer cash balance, there are 3 different position types that have thresholds that you're going to monitor. So that includes our substitutes, our part-time hourly positions, and our part-time daily positions. Now, when we look at substitute positions, this type of membership, when we talk about thresholds, this type of mandatory membership is going to be based on the amount of service performed. And when we look at substitute positions, they're typically filling in for positions in place of somebody else, right? And we'll talk about the other position types as well. But substitute positions must perform 100 days of creditable service for the same employer in the same fiscal year. So if they perform that 100 days, their membership begins the first day of the following pay period. Now, one common question we get here is, what if they complete those 100 days in June of the fiscal year? That's still within that same fiscal year, so they would still have a membership date of that following pay period, which would be July 1. So their 100 days count does start over in July, but if they hit it in June, they still have that membership date on that July 1st date. Now, if your substitute mandates defined benefit membership, you are going to enroll them as a member using transaction code 11, and you report their compensation using member code 1 and assignment code 54. Again, all creditable service requires defined benefit coverage, and existing non-member accounts must close, although they can still participate in cash balance if they meet those eligibility requirements. Now, our second type of position that has a threshold to monitor are our part-time hourly positions. So part-time hourly positions are often at will or on-call employees. And these types of positions, if they perform 60 hours of creditable service for the same employer in a single pay period this time. So before substitutes, we're looking at fiscal year. Part-time hourly, we're looking at a single pay period, so typically month to month. So if they perform that 60 hours of creditable service, their membership begins the first day of the following pay period. And again, enroll those employees using transaction code 11. They are reported using member code 1 and assignment code 55. And again, all creditable service requires defined benefit coverage, and existing non-member accounts must close. And then last, we have our part-time daily positions. So again, often at will or on-call employees. And something important to remember as we discuss these 3 different types of positions is you cannot combine those limits for mandatory membership purposes. Because remember, we're looking at fiscal year, we're looking at single pay periods, we're comparing hours versus days. So you're not adding those different position types up for mandatory membership purposes. Our part-time daily positions must perform 10 days of creditable service for the same employer in a single pay period. And again, membership begins the first day of the following pay period. And again, enroll those employees using transaction code 1 and then member code 1, assignment code 55. And same effect here, all creditable service requires defined benefit coverage and existing non-member accounts must close. All right, I'll pause for a moment for questions on thresholds for defined benefit membership. I'll take a peek at the Q&A and then we will wrap up our presentation. See if I missed anything as I was talking through that section.
Jen, while we wait for a couple questions to trickle in, if any do, and before you do your wrap up, I just have a couple of quick updates to share, if I may. So one update, there was a SO announcement yesterday about our CalSTRS employer resources job aid being updated. So that job aid has a myriad of mailboxes that different folks at CalSTRS use for different business areas. One of the changes on that form is that the employer training team will be tackling TRL or teachers retirement law related questions directly from employers. So you're welcome to send any questions you have about teachers retirement law, you know, whether or not a payment is creditable, whether or not service is creditable, any questions that you have after attending a module directly to employer training if you like. And we will be working with you on those. That being said, you're always welcome to email employerhelp@calstrs.com directly for anything CalSTRS related, and your employer help analyst will route your inquiry to the appropriate place if it's not within their wheelhouse. So that is a change. So you might be getting emails and contacts from some different folks depending on the nature of your question, but all of the trainers are equally equipped to help you with those. And hopefully that will be a great resource for you on any questions that you have. The other update I wanted to give, just a little plug to Alex Milkey. So Alex Milkey was a fan favorite trainer with a lot of employers. He is no longer a member of the training and development team, but he hasn't gone too far. He's now one of our managers in employer help. So just want to congratulate Alex on his promotion and let all of you know that request Alex by name, that he's no longer here to offer training for you, but he is still at CalSTRS in employer help, and a lot of you may still be working with him. So we're glad to have him here still. Yes, and then we are happy to answer any of those questions you have directly if you want to email us at employertraining@calstrs.com.
All right, thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Megan. Appreciate all of the discussion and participation from everyone. And please, if you or your districts want to have a more focused training, you can absolutely reach out to CalSTRS and ask for training specific for you all. And our trainers are happy to put together something for you. So I believe we're moving into our open forum part of the meeting. So aside from the training, I think we had lots of good discussion for Jennifer and for Megan. But for anything else related to tonight's or today's meeting, or anything else that maybe we haven't covered that you have questions about that's come up, now is your time. And then I think, do we have a slide on upcoming dates for EAC that we can put up also?
We do.
So this is our upcoming schedule. You can start planning. As you know, CalSTRS is still primarily virtual, working from home still. So our May 11th meeting will still be in this format. The dates for the following two meetings, I believe the dates are tentative, and we still are tentative on format. So we are not sure if those will be in person or virtual. We will communicate more with you as we know what's going on, but those would be our placeholders for those particular dates. I don't see any raised hands, and I don't see anything in the Q&A. So I just want to say thank you all for being here this afternoon, and we appreciate your participation and you taking time out of your day to be with us and learn about what's going on at CalSTRS. And thanks to all of our wonderful presenters and trainers. And we hope you all have a great rest of your week.
Thank you, everyone. And we look forward to seeing everyone on May 11th.